Although I was doing a lot of television and stage work at the time, I wasn't able to get into any films. And I went around the agents with my photographs, and one of them said, well, there's no work. It's all, in those days, we're talking about the late 50s, he said, it's all men, it's the army and everything. He said, this latest film, there's only one girl in it. So you don't turn around and say, oh, could I be that girl in it? So he said, oh, and went away with my tail between my legs. But what actually happened is that they had auditioned many, many actresses or young ladies for the part of Cynthia in I'm All Right, Jack, and were in despair because they couldn't find anyone. And Richard Attenborough, who was in I'm All Right, Jack, said to the Boltings, why don't you try somewhere like Spotlight, where it's a directory, but is for people who haven't got agents, and she may not have an agent, whoever you're looking for. So Spotlight contacted me, particularly because he'd seen the end of term of my drama school of 2 years and had thought I was very good, and I just stayed in his memory. So I was asked to go to Shepperton to see the Bolting brothers, who I'd obviously heard of and knew the films. So I prepared myself with the words and everything because I knew the audition was going to be in a little bubble car. And when I arrived, and John Bolting just took one look at me and said, oh, you're not at all right for this part, my dear. And I said, but I've travelled here. I said, I've caught the bus and the train and the tube. And I said, and I've learnt the lines, and you're not even going to hear me. So he said to the makeup, it's lunchtime now. You get her ready and I'll see her after the lunch. So they transformed me. I mean, I was there in an ordinary buttoned-up cardigan, and they put a very tight sweater on me and a belt and the eyelashes and the long hair, and I could hardly recognise myself. So that when the Boltings came and I did an audition, by that time all the girls had been auditioning with like Ian Carmichael, and by that time I was left with the studio manager, who was named Phil Shipway. He just ran the studio. So I did a very amateur, allegedly, audition, and went off home quite satisfied that at least I'd met the Bolting brothers. And he did say to me, have you ever been in any other films? And I said, no. I said, but I've been in a lot of television shows. And he said, well, that's nothing to be proud of, my dear, because in those days, television was not sort of liked by film people. It was just like it was the pits.
Dad, tell Mum I'll be in late tonight, will you?
Very well, Cynthia. You want overtime, are you?
Don't be daft. Going up west. Dancing.
My daughter, Cynthia, works here spindle polishing.
I was thrilled to get a phone call to say I was in I'm All Right, Jack, and there I was working with all these fabulous people. I mean, Margaret Rutherford I'd admired, and Richard Attenborough, obviously, and Ian Carmichael. There was also Peter Sellers. He'd been in a lot of television shows, and I knew him well. I knew him well privately and also professionally. And so we were mates from the start. I mean, they were a stellar cast. Irene Handel I had worked with in many plays, stage plays. We would tour together. She was one of my favourite people. Great practical joker, unexpectedly. She always had with her a little one of those tiny chihuahuas that if you went near her at all, it bit you. It bit Sid James once on a live show, and he wasn't very happy, and he held back all his swearing.
Capacity? My dear fellow, the only capacity natural to these stinkers is the capacity to dodge the column.
Terry Thomas, I'd seen him on the stage. He'd been brilliant at the Prince of Wales Theatre. Terry Thomas had an act. I'm sure not a lot of people knew that was his background, where he kept putting the wrong discs on. He was a disc jockey.
Rather a punishing night last night. Did a spot of time and motion study of my own. Redhead, rather athletic.
And of course I was thrilled. I sat down and there was my name on a chair. My name, incidentally, was changed because I was Elizabeth. And he said, the bolting said, you can't be Elizabeth, you've got to be Liz, because there's an Elizabeth Fraser in the States who did the Bilko shows, and Equity will not allow anyone to have the same name. So they abbreviated my name to Liz Fraser, which of course was a good thing. It was a much easier name to remember.
Stan?
Mm-hmm.
Do you mind me asking you something?
Of course not.
Cross your heart.
Cross my heart.
Are them your own teeth?
Gorgeous role for me to play, because suddenly I was a sex symbol, and that was great fun, you know. I think I grew 2 inches in stature and thrust my boobs out, which had always been discreetly hidden under a corset or something. And no, it was the time of my life. I didn't get paid very well. It was 7 weeks at £50 a week, but they gave me a chauffeur-driven car, so that sort of made up for it. And I was picked up in a chauffeur-driven car and driven to the studios, and my name was on a chair.
Now, Miss Kite, if you just look up at Mr. Windrush and smile. Thank you.
Bolting brothers alternated on films. One would direct one film and the other one would produce. On our film, John was directing and Roy was producing. The next film, which I did again for them, Roy was directing and John was producing. So they were twins, so they had a lovely relationship. And the whole of Shepperton had a really nice atmosphere. It was something I took in my stride, but just loved the memories of doing it. It was a fantastic film for me to start off with, because it was won all sorts of awards, and I was nominated, this is 1959, as one of the best newcomers of the year, a BAFTA award, and I was up against about 6 others, and Hayley Mills had just done Tiger Bay, and she was about 12. And if you can't get a BAFTA when you're 12, you needn't bother.
Don't cry like that, girlie. Don't upset yourself, Cynthia. You see what you've done, don't you?
What am I going to do with these suspenders?
I could tell you.
The result of me being in I'm All Right, Jack was fantastic, because up until then it had been nearly all, as I've said, plays and tours. Now I was established for films, and the Boltings then recommended me to people who were just going to make a film called Desert Mice, which had Sid James and Dora Bryan and everybody in as a whole Ensa group. And Boltings phoned them up and said, look, we have a girl here that we think would be very good in your film. So they were looking after me. They incidentally offered me a 7-year contract, which my agent, which they found for me because I didn't really have one, said, no, she's not tying herself up for 7 years. But then I was in Desert Mice and with Basil Dearden, and that was meant I'd made 2 films in a period of about 4 months. And then it gets around. So I was then doing film after film. And in the 60s, the carry-ons started, and then left them because I was so typecast being in the carry-ons that everybody would, and they still do. I may as well have done them all, because they all say, oh, you and the carry-on girl. It's the bane of my life. I'd like to be known for having a dog, really.
I must ask all those present to retire while I hold a press conference.
Press conference? Who do you think you are, Diana Dawes?
It would be my favourite film, because it wasn't just my first, but it was the cast. I either knew them or really knew them at the end of the film. And it's great to work with people that you really respect. It is great to do that, because sometimes you work with people that you don't give a toss about.